Welcome everyone to the latest video interview from Undercurrent News. I'm Tom Seaman, the editorial director of Undercurrent. Today I'll be speaking with Robins McIntosh, the Vice President of Thailand's CP Group and CEO at Homegrown Shrimp USA, a land-based farming operation based in the state of Florida, where he's speaking to me from today. You can't really be in the shrimp business and not know Robins. He's basically seen and done it all. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with an intro. Robins did an interview with my colleague Matt Craze a few weeks ago, which was focused on the land-based shrimp farming side. So today, the focus is going to be on the global supply outlook. So the way we're going to do the interview is I'm going to display a few slides which Robins has prepared, and we're going to talk through them, and then we'll go into more depth afterwards. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see what we have. And just as a disclaimer, absolute accuracy in shrimp numbers is not possible. So these are best guesses on my part.
So here we go. As Robin said, it's generally you're taking a punt, to use an American phrase, with forecasting in shrimp. But we'll be talking. There are obviously numbers on these presentations, but the important thing here to remember is the trends is what we'll really be discussing.
Correct.
So yeah, maybe Robins, you could kick off here by giving a kind of a top level, sort of top line view on what happened in 2021 to drive this increase in production globally, and then why you think that that's going to continue in 2022.
I think if we look at this chart going at 2013, that was the low point of EMS and those diseases that hit in that 2012, 2013, 24 range. And we're still catching up in production towards world consumption. We've also seen very strong consumption patterns due to the popularity of seafood in the last few years, and that trend will continue. So between the catch up that we've been doing and that increased trend toward consumption, much of it not price sensitive, is really driving a very healthy increase in shrimp production in the last 2 years. And again, I think we will see this going forward to 2022 as well, given a few other considerations that we can talk about later. The other trend is America and Asia. So those are the two major shrimp growing areas for export. And Asia used to have a real dominant position, 76% of the world in 2011. But it's dropped down to about 66%. While on the other hand, the Americas have increased 10% of the world production. And I think that trend will also continue to see more shrimp produced in the Americas. Asia will continue to grow, but probably at a lower rate than we see in the Americas.
Okay, we'll move to the next slide where we're going into a bit more detail here on the numbers, and obviously the big headline here is the growth in Ecuador. I just wanted to get a bit of a commentary and insight from you on what's been the driver this year. Obviously you're envisaging further growth in 2022, and do you think that can be continued in Ecuador beyond 2022?
Yeah, so I think for Ecuador, they are the country that won the 1 million ton award, first country to reach 1 million tons. And they've been putting on very healthy gains for the last 3 or 4 years, from 850 to over 1 million tons this year, and you can expect another 150,000 tons next year. And this is through intensification. It's not Asian intensification, it's South American intensification, meaning they've gone from 6-8 per square meter to maybe 15 per square meter. Their stocks are performing better, so they're getting more crops in, maybe 3.5 crops a year versus 2 crops or even 1 crop if you go back 10 years ago. Going into 22, I think we'll continue to see this trend. Now, the one reason that Ecuador has really outperformed in Central America and the rest are kind of stagnant, they don't move like Ecuador. Ecuador is still the country with the resource, the large ponds paid for, all infrastructure in, and they really have upped their game technically. They've got new feed mills, higher technology in feeds. Their animals are improving. Their technologists are improving. In the early days, Ecuador was kind of founded by what I call the expatriate cowboys. Now they're local and they're becoming very technically adept. And so Ecuador has done a real good job of upping their game. And so I see this continuing. Now, when you get past maybe 20, 25 per square meter, you get into densities used by other countries in America. There's more stress in those ponds than you would find in an Ecuadorian pond. And it's that stress that brings out disease, which Ecuador has been blessed not to have a lot of. So, how much more density they can add on before they hit that line where they go from extensive to semi-intensive to intensive, where you run into the more disease problems like we'll have in countries that tend to intensify more than, say, 18 or 20 per square meter. But I really, looking at the model and the increased technology and the capability of Ecuador and the money they're putting into processing and increasing their product range, they're really doing it all right. I mean, they've got the world's best shrimp. That's a fantastic platform to work from. They work together. Ecuador has really put it together, and I think they showcase what shrimp farming can be. And so it would not surprise me if they can get close to 2 million tons.
How long do you think it could potentially take them to hit that, though?
Well, do your trend line out at 150,000 tons a year.
Right, yeah, true. And I think what's been interesting to see is when we did the webinar way back, which you were on, when it looked a bit more precarious for Ecuador with the Chinese market, and their efforts to switch towards the US and Europe and having to invest in more labor-intensive, processing. But the industry's really kind of pivoted and balanced out very impressively, hasn't it? It's kind of like
they have. I mean, Ecuador is to be really congratulated on the efficiency of which they've worked and which they have addressed problems in marketing and other areas as well. I mean, they really have a lot to be congratulated for. I remember when I first, talked to Ecuadorian marketers back in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, they had suffered some issues. And at that point, they had a program that said, we want to do 30, 30, 30, 30 Asia, 30 America, 30 Europe, because it's balanced. And that really worked well for them. But then when the Chinese market came along and was an easy market and basically was easy to sell into, and they offered great prices, and it was heads on, and it was bulk, and it didn't require a lot of processing. So as they increased production, they really didn't have to do much in processing. They sell it to China. They really slanted away from the 30-30 model. But today, it looks like they're going back to a 30-30-30 model. And it's really an excellent model for them to follow. And they've got the product to do it, and they're creating the product for them. So instead of just going to bulk shipping to China, they're basically going into retail packs. They're going into packs that can be distributed through other channels successfully.
Yeah, and I'll just go back to sharing my screen again, back to the presentation to touch upon a couple of interesting stories in Asia from these numbers. We've got India. You're forecasting India to grow somewhat this year, but then to basically flatline at around 700,000 tons. I just wonder whether you could shed a bit of light on.
Flatline is basically a cop-out. I don't know which way India is going to go. Again, as I said, I generally follow trend lines, and I look at the strength of the trend, and the trend in India is broken. So it's hard to say. It's at a pivot point. So it could start to accelerate again, or it could drift down some. We know that we've got increasing disease issues in Andhra Pradesh. We know that we've had more weather-related losses in Gujarat, Bengal from typhoons. And so it's really hard to guess which way India is going to go. So I flatline it. But it could move up and it could move down.
Right.
It's just a very difficult country at this point to project it with any confidence.
Yeah, and then obviously, China is not so much of a integral part of the global production stakes, because most of their shrimp is consumed domestically. But if China produces more shrimp, maybe it imports less, so it does kind of have an impact. And
Yeah, I know.
you're guiding for an increase in Chinese production overall. I just wonder whether you could talk us through the thinking.
Yeah, I think China basically, again, is showing some correct trends. It's not strong enough to really, be strong in terms of projecting, with a lot of confidence, but their technology seems to be improving. They seem to be getting some local companies with a stronger presence and stronger leadership in the shrimp culture community, which is very, very important, I think, for a shrimp industry. And much of the growth that I show here this year was from black tiger. And for me, the black tiger story in China is very interesting from a personal point of view, from a CP point of view, as well as a Chinese point of view, that, China has always had a strong market to buy black tiger live from Vietnam and from Thailand, for very high price. And people have avoided growing it in any large numbers because if you can grow white shrimp, you're going to make more money with white shrimp than black tiger. You can't get the yields. But in China, they've had real disease issues. They've had disease issues with EMS, with SHIV, Div1 virus, with EHP, and a bunch of viruses and diseases that have held back the white shrimp industry. I mean, if we remember before EMS, China did over 1 million tons. So maybe they are actually the first country to do over 1 million tons. But EMS really affected China, and they've had a hard time coming back with EHP and then SHIV and probably some other pathogens thrown in. But what they found with the black tiger seems to not be bothered by these diseases. So they get very high success rates. Whereas maybe the success rate with a white shrimp pond is 30 or 40% probability of success. With black tiger, it's 2 years ago, it was 90% success. This year, it's less than the 90, but better than the white shrimp. And the reason for that is black tiger does better at low densities, and you don't really dare increase the density to the levels you do white shrimp. And again, it's the Ecuadorian effect. When you're at the lower densities and lower stress, you do better. That would be one reason that the black tiger might be so successful in China and other countries where they have problems with white shrimp. But in any event, more and more black tiger is being grown in China in place of white shrimp, where farmers have had a hard time with profitability.
Well, yeah, and in the background here, the viewer sort of noticed I've skipped the presentation onto a slide about global black tiger monodon production, which illustrates that you're almost saying that China has almost kind of doubled its black tiger production in the past.
Yes. Right, it's gone up very, very rapidly, and again, I see that mimicked. And again, this is made possible by the introduction of domesticated SPF shrimp. The wild shrimp did not do this. So the new domesticated SPF shrimp, of which CP has one of the stocks, has really changed the dynamic. And if we remember, even going back on the white shrimp story, Asia was floundering with black tiger back in 2000, 2001. It was not until we introduced the SPF, the disease-free white shrimp, into Asia in 2002, 2003 that we had the explosion of white shrimp. White shrimp, before the introduction of clean white shrimp, was no better than dirty black tiger. It's the clean white shrimp introduction, domestication into Asia, and we did not have black tiger. We really got clean SPF domesticated black tiger about 3 or 4 years ago. And so that is making a big change relative to success in growing black tiger again, because we now have a domesticated stock.
And then just looking quickly at Indian black tiger production, I mean, you're also forecasting, strong production increase there in 2022. I wondered, how is that number a bit of a punt, or are you pretty sure there's something happening there where more farmers are maybe switching?
No, there is something happening there. So again, a lot of it is happening in Gujarat. Some is happening in Andhra Pradesh. West Bengal has been the historic home for black tiger in India. But India has got disease issues, and black tiger, for whatever the reason, seems to avoid many of those disease issues. So Gujarat black tiger has done really, really well this year. Andhra Pradesh black tiger has done really, really well again, where the white shrimp failed. So when white shrimp fail, they're finding that they can grow black tiger successfully, and that's driving this increase. Interesting story, say, in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, I visited maybe 5-6 years ago, and I was trying to understand why a farmer, because in Vietnam, they've got free choice. In the Mekong, they can grow black tiger or they grow white shrimp. And some farms grow both. So the question I had for farmers, how do you choose what you want to grow, white shrimp or black tiger? Well, there was really two answers. One answer was basically put as black tiger is the poor man's shrimp. When you're doing black tiger, you don't need that fancy liner, all that aeration, all of those expensive things that you need for white shrimp. So if you're a poor farmer, you're going to do black tiger. The other answer was white shrimp farmers that were failing, because it seems that when we get disease in a neighborhood, we go to black tiger because black tiger succeeds. And when we see the white shrimp start to succeed again, we'll switch back into white shrimp. So they have learned that, they go both ways depending on success of the white shrimp. And again, if you're a poor farmer that doesn't have the money to intensify, to add that aeration, to add, the liners or the things that you need for the white shrimp, the black tiger is a very good substitute for them. And again, that would be the same reason that you would have black tiger in Bangladesh or the extensive farms of Indonesia. Black tiger is, quote, your poor man's shrimp.
But the pricing is higher, so it's a good good one to produce, I guess.
Yes. But again, when you do the high price times the less yield, you still are better off getting the smaller margins with white shrimp if you're successful.
And in terms of is the Chinese market differentiating between black tiger and Vanimay, or is it basically being sold as the same product? Do you know?
No, it's differentiated. Black tiger has a market of itself. And again, it's larger shrimp. Although in China they can sell all sizes, you really get those big premiums when you have a large live shrimp to sell. And of course, selling a live shrimp from China is a lot easier than selling a live shrimp from Thailand. But that's what they were doing. They were selling the black tiger from Thailand live and Vietnam live. And that gave very high margins.
So that trade has basically been replaced by Chinese domestic production, really.
More or less.
And has the black tiger from Thailand and Vietnam, is that finding its way into their domestic markets, or how's that then being?
Well, there's domestic markets, and of course Vietnam is close to China. It's got a land border, so a lot of black tiger will move in from Vietnam to China. Yeah. And again, Vietnam has a very lively export market of black tiger. I mean, Vietnam's numbers, I put 120, 130,000 tons. Again, it's a very hard number to get your handle on because maybe only 20% of black tiger in Vietnam is fed. The rest is extensive. And again, it's very difficult to get a handle on the extensive production, especially when you've got, unmonitored markets to China or domestic, et cetera, and not export related.
We're talking of exports, that brings me to the next slide, which I'll go full screen on now. Which shows the top three shrimp exporting countries. Obviously, you've got Ecuador, the top there, and then Vietnam and India pretty much neck and neck, and you can really see the growth of Ecuador from being smaller potentially than both Vietnam and India to being the largest. But you seem to be. It seems to be that you see Vietnam and India basically pretty much producing the same quantity and exporting the same quantity. And do you think Vietnam?
I think that's where we're going to be next year, provided that we don't get any unexpected slide. But I see Vietnam. The trend line on Vietnam is very, very strong. The trend line on India is very weak at this point. So India is difficult to predict. Vietnam's trend line is very strong. And so you can just keep running that trend up. And until we see a break in that trend, Vietnam is going to continue to increase its production in a very predictable manner, I believe. It won't be any massive gains. It's not going to be it's a very predictable trend line. And so it's the kind of trend line I like because I think use the word sustainable trend line. It's not something that's making massive gaps.
And that's happened even this year with the kind of, terrible problems with COVID that the country's had. They've sustained that that production and export growth from what you can see?
Right. And again, what I like about Vietnam is they are pivoting into new technology, what I call really small tank, small pond intensive technology, which can give great performance even with the diseases and the intensive systems. So they're the strongest country in pivoting in that direction. And higher percentages of that production is coming from that new technology. And that will continue. And that's why I believe that trend line is strong into the future. And at some point, maybe it even overtakes Ecuador. Who knows? But I really like what they're doing technically and that industry and the way that they're growing it in a very methodical manner.
So that's effectively why, and by contrast, you would say India's industry has kind of grown more by expanding production area as opposed to the technological side, hasn't it?
Well, expanding production area. And again, if you look at the charts for Indian production, it really exploded when they went away from black tiger to white shrimp in 2008, 2009. And they were not affected by the diseases of China, Vietnam, Thailand, EMS. And so when markets increased the price during those years, that was huge incentive for investment to intensify, to modernize, to increase production in India and in Ecuador. So those two countries took the lead at the expense of Thailand and Vietnam and those that suffered from the downdraft of EMS, but the world responded with higher prices. That always incentivizes new investment to increase production. And where that went during those years was India and Ecuador.
Okay, thanks, Robins. Well, on to the next slide. Really interesting on this, visually, because you can see just the incredible growth of Ecuador compared to the other countries in Latin America. And I just wondered, if you could give us a bit of a summary as to why you think that is. Why is it Ecuador has accelerated so much where, the other production countries have kind of languished?
Well, Ecuador is again, I'll probably be corrected, but I call it extensive, or it was extensive. It was in the 10 per square meter range back in the EMS early days. It's now probably 14, 15 per square meter. But the rest of the Americas was in the 20, 30, 35, 40 per square meter. And that's a different culture than Ecuadorian style culture. Now, Ecuador can do that because they have 200,000, 230,000 hectares of already paid for built large ponds. And so they're blessed with that, as well as the Estero in Guayaquil. And so they really were ready as they apply more technology. So companies like Cargill that brought in new feed technology and improving their genetics, their stocks, their local, the ownership and the technical proficiency of Ecuadorians has gone well beyond being an artist into a technical producer. So because, again, they weren't stressed out by the higher densities that the other countries had, that gave them advantage, but they have the resource to do it. And so when you look at the numbers, if you have 220,000 hectares of ponds, 1 million tons is only 4 tons per hectare year. That's real low. You look at Thailand is over 30 tons per hectare year. So if they just get to 6 tons per hectare year, that's 6 times 2, that's 1.2 million. That is, given the way they're running their industry now, that's very doable. 2 million tons. That would be, what's 2 million? That's 10 tons per hectare year. Now that's getting a little bit more intensive. Now, whether that puts them over, I don't know. That's, but I think, up to 1.4, 1.5 million tons, they should be able to do that without too much trouble if they continue their trends of intensifying, and that's adding some aerators, auto feed, more technology in feeds, better stocking animals, and again, improved technologists running the industry. It's a really good story.
Do you see there's potential for the Ecuadorian farmers to reach out into other countries and start farming there to increase production? I
don't think it works. Again, the thing that they have are those large ponds that are paid for. They can make money, and they can do very well at under 15 per square meter. When you go to other countries, you have to develop a new pond. You have to buy. Land is more expensive. It's not already in place that you bought in the 80s or the 70s. It's very difficult to duplicate in Ecuador. And if an Ecuadorian farmer tries Ecuadorian technology in other countries or tries to adopt Ecuadorian to their situations, it's difficult. It does not always adapt.
Yeah, so there's very, very sort of high barriers to entry, basically, really.
Right. No, they've been blessed with a with a resource that other people don't have, and that early adoption of shrimp back in the 70s, where much of this land was put into shrimp ponds when land was very, very cheap.
Yeah.
So you could do big ponds with low productivity.
I'm going to share now a similar chart for Asia. And you can see here, it's kind of a visualization of what we've discussed earlier, which is that India is flatlining and the growth is coming from other countries. But yeah, just maybe talk us through this slide a little bit, please.
Well, again, as you see, Vietnam. Let me see. I have to see my slide. So, the whole industry is grown at about 20%. And that's really driven by 16 in Vietnam, 16 in Indonesia, and 30% in India for 10-year growth. The rest is only a growth of 0.2%. So it really has been carried by India, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Indonesia has a lot of potential to continue to grow. I mean, they do have lots of resources, and I think that they will grow. I think when I look at the shrimp culturists of Indonesia, again, it's a young group. They are becoming very technical. They are learning to intensify successfully. So I see a really bright, and the water resource are clean. It's cleaner than the South China Sea. So, and they're around the equator. So Indonesia has a lot going for them to continue to grow. Vietnam, with their strong pivot to better intensive technologies, also has a very bright future. India is trying to figure its way, I think. So very strong growth in the past. And if you'd asked me several years ago, and I probably still believe this to a certain extent, although Ecuador is proving me wrong, when a country grew more than 20% annually for 3 or 4 straight years, a straight up projection, generally they crashed. We saw that in China. We saw that in Thailand. We've seen that in other countries where very strong growth ends in a crash, where more sustainable growth, like you do see in Vietnam and Indonesia, generally leads less probability of that crash happening. And so India had that very 30% strong growth. And sometimes you just outgrow your capabilities for keeping the technology and the people and the industry, primed for that. You outgrow your capabilities. Not saying that that's what happened in India, but again, historically, when I look at the countries and the history of shrimp farming, I see that over and over again. So hopefully India can right it. It can start adopting new technologies like Vietnam has learned to do, like Indonesia is doing. Of course, they really have no capability of doing in Ecuador. So you have to look at the modern technologies and successful intensification in the presence of many, many pathogens and deteriorating environment.
Do you think that with regards to Indonesia, this kind of government, often the government throws around some pretty ludicrous figures of production, 700, 800,000 tons and things that are way off, but the government has clearly got a strong will to grow production. From what I hear, it's a very serious thing that they do want to boost it. What do you think we are going to see that in the next couple of years with the government really kind of getting behind the industry? And
well, I don't know. To me, government can be behind industry. That means they don't put any impediments to the industry. They don't over-regulate the industry, or they do things to hold back the private sector. The private sector is what grows this industry. Not governments. So governments can nurture the industry by providing a strong support in terms of the regulatory environment, but they don't input the investment. They don't, they can only incentivize. I think Indonesia is doing many of those things, but it really is up to the private sector and the leadership within the private sector to grow the industry. And I think there is that in Indonesia. They haven't grown as, they're not in the forefront like Vietnam, but when I look at the young farmers or some of the farms that are being developed in Indonesia, they're very, very modern. They've got a very progressive look to them. And so I do see a bright future for Indonesia.
Well, on to the next slide. We'll just show this, and then I'll get rid of the slide and get back to the conversation, because it'd be great to discuss. It's been a very, very positive discussions so far, really, with the production rising, but be good to chat about risk factors and your views. We've got obviously the increasing odd weather patterns around the world. I guess the potential for new diseases, but obviously there doesn't seem to be really anything on the horizon. So yeah, I mean, it would be good to pick your brains on possible risk factors which could derail this growth next year, maybe the year beyond.
Well, I think for the last 10 years, certainly since EMS, prior to EMS in 2011, 2010, we were all very optimistic. We were beating our chest that we were sustainable. We were going to the sky, and EMS kind of was a wake-up call of reality, bringing the topics of a declining environment, increasing pathogen prevalence, maybe overcrowding culture areas, and some sloppy culture prospects that we did. And so in 2012, it started going down, and we're just again regaining that notion. But we also started developing new technologies, and I think the genetics have improved since then. We've improved some of the management. Some of the management may have backslid, I think, but again, some of the more progressive areas where there's smaller ponds, recycling, recirculating systems, feeds. We are, for the most part, on a positive trajectory. So really then, as we catch up with what I had as a long-term consumption pattern, it really then becomes costs and potentially balancing production with markets and how we market this product. And so I know in this last year, like in the United States, a lot of the shrimp seafood was bought with some of the money, the money that was thrown out, for COVID. That money is gone now. So what is that going to do to consumption? But we've had very strong consumption in the United States. We've had strong consumption increases in China. But again, it's going to be a balancing act on how that consumption increases against the production. Production clearly can increase very, very fast right now on this trend that we have, 500,000 tons a year. Will we be able to increase the consumption, especially now that we've got inflation? So at which point does seafood become less desirable in the market? On the other hand, are we going to pass some of this down to the farmer? Because right now the farmer is seeing inflation in feed costs. He's seeing inflation in seed costs. He's seeing inflation in other things. And so if the farm gate doesn't increase in relation to that, what you will find with farms that really aren't small farms, they can turn off tomorrow. And the majority of production in Asia today is in small farms. So if they're not being paid for the risk of what they're doing, they will turn off the production. And so we could see a correction in the production trend just because of the cost structures of the industry have not caught up. If it catches up and the farmer gets enough money to pay for the risk and the higher costs, it will continue up. But there needs to be some adjustments made at this point. Otherwise, I fear that maybe farms will become less aggressive at stocking and farming until it adjusts worldwide in terms of the prices that they receive. But that, to me, is the biggest threat, not disease. Disease, again, takes several years. EMS took 4 years. White spot took 3 or 4 years to impact world production. Today, I don't see any diseases on the horizon that are not already with us that would affect the dynamic of the trend lines that we have today.
Do you feel that the industry is set up better now to equip with that next disease when it does come? Because as you say, these things don't, happen. That there's, you can see it 2 years ahead if you're looking closely enough. Do you think that the next one, based on what's happened with what happened with EMS, the next big disease won't become a big disease because the industry will be able to manage it better because there's more communication?
I would hope so, but I'm not sure that's the case. I'm not sure we have better communication. We actually have more cover-up now than we used to. There's something about if you get a disease, it's shameful, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And, I remember the environments back in the 1990s when we got Taura. There was no shame in reporting we had Taura. When we got white spot, there was no shame in reporting you had white spot. There was a much more collaborative effort to try to understand it and what to do. But EMS, for whatever the reason, changed that environment. You don't want to report you have it, even though it doesn't affect any marketability. And that overall environment now in the shrimp culture world of let's not divulge anything. I think that for me, that's one of the disappointments in that we're not working better together.
And I guess maybe the pandemic situation has not helped that because it's limited travel and limited people to actually go and see things for themselves as well. I imagine you've probably been limited in what you could do in terms of actually getting out to the other countries in Asia.
Absolutely. So don't hold my numbers too deep. Most of that's from a telephone. Whereas before I'd actually get a feel for what's going on. And yeah, you get a much better feel if you're out walking around with a farmer than you do on a telephone.
I'm sure they're still better than most people's numbers because it is just it's a bit of a punt generally in the industry making these forecasts, isn't it? I'd also like to kind of get a sense from you about what you think the ongoing evolutions of the COVID pandemic is going to mean for both the production and the market side. You kind of alluded to potential market impact just then when you said obviously the boost in the US has maybe been driven partly by government support money, which is no longer going to be there. So is that how much is that going to impact things? And then are there?
I think again, I'm no expert in this, but the little bit I see is the logistic costs right now and the uncertainty of logistics has certainly changed the dynamic, say, between Asia and America and South America and America. The container costs have skyrocketed, which is adding on to the costs of bringing shrimp in and probably hurt the price that are being offered because they're trying to hold the price to the farmer. So for me, South America, the U.S. is a much closer market. Asia is a much further market, and if these high costs of transport continue and the uncertainty of transport continues for much longer, that also will probably help drive the divergence from Asia being the main supplier to the America to Ecuador and South America being a major or a main supplier to America as well as Europe. So that's what I would be looking for. And certainly Ecuador is providing and they're showing their capability of doing US type retail packs. And they've got good acceptance. So with that cost differential just in transport, you got to put that in the equation as potentially a significant driver and change here.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And like to sum up, I'd like to actually go back to the first slide, which I'm just going to share now. And obviously we can see here essentially in the last 10 years production has almost doubled globally. Do you think it's conceivable to think that could happen in the next 10 years, or is there going to be a ceiling just on what can happen? Both I guess from a market, it's going to be the market that decides that, right?
It's going to be the market and the price. Again, Ecuador and India were born out of EMS and a high market price for a couple of years. If our production overshoots the consumption, and prices come down, that may hurt the overall dynamic. It will slow the growth rate. So at some point, you're going to get the markets and production in sync relative to the prices the markets will pay and the cost of production. Technology will continue to bring costs of production or maintain costs of production in line relative to overall, other inflationary pressures like fees. So we will have a positive there. And certainly the capability, without really expanding area very much, is going up. So again, I don't see shrimp farming area expanding. I would like to think that shrimp farming area will shrink, but we will have higher efficient technologies to produce more shrimp from smaller areas using smaller amounts of resources, and do this in a cost-effective manner relative to the costs that a market will pay. And again, allow more and more consumers to enjoy shrimp more often. But all of these are the dynamics that are working now and will really determine, how much shrimp we will produce in this world. But if you look at every country, as you said, every country wants to grow their shrimp production, especially if it's export. But nobody is really looking at, how much shrimp will the markets take before it collapses the price below the point at which our farmers will make a reasonable profit or living.
What we've seen, though, in the past couple of years is that when the price does seem to soften, the market just seems to kind of gobble up more shrimp and absorb it, doesn't it? That's kind of, what I've...
Oh, absolutely. So again, we could double shrimp production if we brought the price of shrimp down to a chicken. No problem. More than triple. But can we ever get the technology to produce at a cost that will allow a reasonable profit so that you could bring down the cost to the price of a chicken? Now, again, this is off subject, but it's something that I think is worth bringing up. The production of shrimp is what I call the standard deviation is too great. So in chickens, the standard deviation on production costs and production efficiency is only 5%, 4%. It's very predictable. When you have very predictable outcomes, you can have very small margins and make money. When you have 30% unpredictability in an outcome, you need much higher margins to cover that 30% failure rates or those unpredictable moments. Yeah. So with shrimp, we're very unpredictable relative to a chicken. Our actual costs of production are similar, but we don't have the predictability of a chicken, so our margins have to be higher for a farmer to cover his risk. So as we bring the risk down, as we increase the predictability of production, we can bring margins down so everybody's happy. And those margins will result in a lower retail price. And yes, lower retail price stimulate consumption.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Just actually finally, I'd like, maybe get a bit of a sense from you on which country now would you rate as the lowest cost producer? Would you put it at Vietnam with all the technical, innovation they've got, or is it Ecuador or another country?
I think they're, in many ways, they're similar. Ecuador, I think you'd have to say Ecuador, but that's out of ignorance. I think, again, it's that variability. So there's some farms in Vietnam which beat Ecuador.
Yeah.
But there's many farms that don't. So when you average the industry, because of that variance, okay, we're talking about this variance again. If we were chicken variance of 5%, everybody was in this 5% variance, then whoever is that is going to have the low cost. Ecuador has a lower variance they're higher predictable in their production. And so, I think that they would be the winner here. Whereas, Vietnam is closing their variance, but there's still no chicken. And there probably are no Vietnam or Ecuador yet. But we need to increase the probability of success at a certain level. So it's predictable. Predictability will result in lower margin requirements. Lower margin requirements will again translate into lower prices. So Ecuador, I would say, is the leader because I think their production is much more predictable than, say, a production out of Vietnam. But there are some farms in Vietnam that are predictable at a farm level, and they would have very low cost. And of course, then they benefit by the higher prices that the unpredictability of the industry brings.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Are predictable. They can deal at lower margins.
Got a kind of a narrower gap in Ecuador.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a narrower gap and a more consistent over farms and production because of the technologies that they run.
Okay. Well, have you got anything else to add there, Robins? I mean, I think I've covered everything from my point of view, but if there's something, massively pressing going on in the sector that we've not discussed, now's the time to bring it up.
I can't say that I have anything pressing.
Well, as usual, it's been been a pleasure chatting. Thanks very much for your time. Take care and have a great day. Thanks, Robins.
All right, thank you very much.